Is in the grip of a deep political crisis following the disputed October elections. The government has charged hundreds with treason, barred key opposition leaders and rights groups, reports enforced disappearance and extrajudicial killings. President Samia Suluhu Hassan's near 98% victory faces widespread allegations of fraud, mass protests and a mounting death toll. International observers say the election failed to meet democratic standards, highlighting urgent concerns about political freedom, the future of opposition, and the rule of law in the country. And so at this time, we are joined by Dr. Abigale Mupambi, who is a political analyst. Dr. Mupambi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so very much for having me.
So let's start this way. Are you surprised at how Tanzania has turned out under President Samia Suluhu Hassan, considering the nation's political history and how she ascended to become the president after John Magufuli's death?
Well, thank you so very much. I am not surprised per se. I am not again in contestation on how she ascended to power. For we know very well that it is within the corridors and the precedents of the Tanzanian constitution that after the death of the president then, she was the next to follow in terms of the constitution. But of course, we have seen her governance along the way. But fast forward may be the issue around the just ended elections, October elections, in the elections in Tanzania, which have, of course, catched a lot of attention regionally, internationally, and so forth. I think this is the issue of interest. Yes, my attention is equally drawn to that. But what I want us, as we are going to unpack this, is to understand that election is not an incident. It is not the particular day. It is not an occasion. It is circumstances. It is a process, a long process from the pre-election, during, and of course, the immediate post, and what we see today.
So that makes us understand that when it comes to Hassan's leadership, the triggers probably weren't as a result of the election per se, but because of some antecedents that led to the election. So let's tie it to the opposition party leader, Tundu Lissu, who faces treason charges and is also in incarceration after being arrested for a couple of months before the national election, and some other arrests that we've seen. How would you describe that kind of response or attitude towards opposition figures and parties in the country?
Thank you so very much. I will bring it in two ways. Like I said, the elections is not the very incident that we see on the day. The vote counting is just the last part of elections. You would appreciate that the leader of the main opposition party, Chadema, and of course the chairman, Tundu Lissu, actually had a technical shortfall. I will put it to you that it is in the public domain that he refused to sign the code of conduct, which spelled out the rules of the game. We have rules of the game even if it's in football. We have rules of the game in most of whatever that we do that is structured. But for some reasons, of course, his reasons were so valid: no reform, no election. But the constitutional cycle demands an election. Of course, that's a lobbying position. But I think it was going to be wiser to, of course, borrow like what we saw, what has been done in Kenya. We had one of the long outstanding opposition leader, of course, the late Raila Odinga. He would sign the code of conduct, be part of the process, contest the outcome with merits, submit, and go through the process. That alone would quench and detain any further tension that probably would come. Moving forward, you would also take note that sometime in April, the opposition leader actually also declared utterances utterances themselves that attracted some of the charges that we see today around treason. We will disrupt the election. We will spoil the electoral process. That is not targeted to the President Suluhu Samia, but it is a threat to the sovereign processes of the nation. For me, I think that we also need to take note of that. Yes, let's go also on the side of the response side. We need, of course, to take note of the heavy hand, in particular targeting the youth, targeting the civilians, who are generally, in most cases, caught in between the jaws of these politicians. For me, I really think it is a very, very sad moment that we are now discussing this on top of dead bodies because of politicians. So I wouldn't want to take this to be an issue of the incumbent government, but I also feel that the accountability question must be spread from the opposition leader players who did not, of course, act responsibly, who incited. On the other hand, we also look at a government that must be able to contain and preserve lives. The sanctity of life must be preserved, and that responsibility definitely goes to the Tanzanian government, and in particular, President Samia Suluhu. So we need actors that act responsibly. Let's also interrogate the external hand, which the president of Tanzania is also pointing to say we had the external forces motivating, inciting NGOs coming about, inciting the youth to burn the buildings. So before we talk of the treasonous charges, let's interrogate where these actions by these people actually, can they constitute treason? If yes, what should the judiciary do? So I foresee our opposition forces sometimes creating what we call a dilemma action, where the government is forced to act or to act. Because eventually, when people are burning buildings, when people are disrupting the order of the day, electoral process of the day, surely what should the government do? Definitely not to kill, but to contain. So we need to have such mechanisms in place. But the issue of treasonous issues, I think even as human rights activists, they overreact. This blanket approach will make our opposition leaders never to learn, because they will always find comfort in the blame game. Let's follow the rules of the game. Then we complain because of the process. What is more important is we need to preserve the sanctity of life. These supporters, whether opposition, whether from Chadema or from Chama Pinduzi, these are Africans. Eventually, we will find ourselves interrogating democracy as a system. Is this really our issue? Is this really our cup of tea? Are we able to take it as Africans? That takes me to the next level of such a debate.
Okay, so you were saying that there's the need to prioritize the need to protect the sanctity of life, ensure that people are safe. That should be paramount. But then Tundulisu said he would not sign that accord or that agreement because he foresees that it will legitimize a flawed and a rigged election. So shouldn't that also be a clause or a cause for concern that should equally be addressed? Because now some people feel that even this election that brought President Samia Suluhu Hassan into power was actually rigged.
Well, thank you so very much. It is Tundu Lusu who has assisted the rigging process by refusing to be part of the process, thus handing over a nearly 98% win to the incumbent president right now. So I want to believe that way before elections, way before 2025, there was room for Tanzanians as civic society. There was room for the opposition, some of them being in parliament, to push for these reforms and allow the governance process of elections to proceed when the right time comes. So I'll tell you this. Here in Zimbabwe, we also have such a situation where the opposition is dining and whining with the ruling in parliament all the 4 years. Come the last year of election, they say no elections. We disrupt the elections. And you ask yourself, why were they not pushing for these reforms all along? They are actually exposing the civilians. They're exposing innocent citizens to these tenets of violence. Now these people are charged of treason. Are they charged because they are opposition? No, because they did the acts of treason. So eventually we also need to be calculative as the opposition and say, all these years, the Chadema party is not beginning to be in parliament today. They have been in parliament with a considerable force of member of parliaments. Why haven't they been pushing reforms? Only to wait for the last minute to put a dilemma condition that then pushes a government that is dealing with issues of sovereignty and also the issue of a passage of an election. The pressure definitely will eventually cost, of course, the innocent citizenry. For me, I'm saying we need a collective responsibility. We need a collective accountability from the opposition, both, and of course, the ruling party and the governments themselves. We must never expose our innocent citizenry to scenarios that we know very well as politicians that they are going to cost lives, and in particular, they are going to cost, of course, the future of our youths. We need to find ways, definitely. I'm very much worried. Reforms is an issue around Africa, across the board. This is why I feel that we may need to interrogate the democracy template. If democracy means that the opposition must do things willy-nilly, we may not need that kind of democracy. If democracy means that people should be charged with the treason willy-nilly, we may not need also that kind of democracy. So we need to interrogate such systems at African level. Do we have these institutions to monitor and incubate the kind of democracy that we shout about it? Because we cannot continue to lose lives. Look at what happened in Mozambique. The youth were being given cash in the street to demonstrate and destroy their own infrastructure. Should the law watch them like that? Definitely no. But eventually we lost lives. We cannot continue to lose lives over the same cycle. So Tanzanians must find each other. We must get a responsible SADC to interrogate such. We must get a responsible AU to interrogate such. I get so worried when the opposition report directly to the West. I get so worried. It's so alarming. When they are calling for ICC, please come here. I doubt very much what is their reporting strategy, reporting procedure. We need to build a strong institution within ourselves, our safety haven within ourselves. Okay. Not everything is politics. Even the ICC, it has to come. When we cannot handle our situation, let's not over-exaggerate some of these things. But definitely, it is very sad that we lost lives in Tanzania. That should never be allowed to happen. But let's have every leader taking responsibility. Let the Chadema learn from that. Let the incumbent president learn from that. Let us extend a hand and say, how do we move together as a community, as a people? Tanzania deserves to be unified and move forward. Lessons learned, and let's move forward as Tanzania, as the region, as Africa.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mupambi. Before we wrap up on this, I'd like to confirm, you had said earlier, according to the words of the president anyway, that there are external influences that probably might be fueling instability in Tanzania. I'd like to find out, who could these external forces be? Who could these external interests be? And what kind of institution do you think that a Tanzania, an African country, can build formidably to tackle, foreign interests?
Well, thank you so very much. We have our big brother, the U.S. has been fingered, and allies, they've been fingered in the usual format. But we may not blame them outright, because we invite them in the form of neo-colonialism. Here in Zimbabwe, we call it the people like those crisis-preneurships. They create a state of crisis, then proposals, they go out, they get the money, they survive on the counting dead bodies, they survive on talking crisis, instead of dealing with our own solutions. Okay. We have been touting around African solutions to African problems. But I also think that as Africa, for as long as we don't self-sustain, we will always be hounded by external forces, because he who is determined the tune that we of course sing along as Africans. I think we need to revisit issues of funding our own institutions. We must be able to beneficiate and value add on our own resources so that we don't remain as beggars. For as long as we beg money to do elections, money to even draft our own constitution, money to aid, we will remain, of course, hounded by the issue of external interference. Sometimes it is our own people that invite those external forces, and now we are hounded as a collective.
All right. I must say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Abigale Mupambi, a political analyst, for sharing your passionate thoughts with us on the show at this very point in time. We appreciate that, and we hope that there would be, some very poignant and lasting solutions to the issue bedeviling Tanzania and, of course, Africa. So, I mean, from Sudan to Tanzania, struggles for power are leaving ordinary people caught between violence and repression. In both cases, as you've seen, the cost of control is human suffering and the voices of those affected which go unheard. So when those in power value control over justice, who will speak for the people?